Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis Podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, we follow member Props Head on his non-traditional path working in emerging markets in various startups to working as a strategy consultant before his MBA. Learn about a key step he took before going to business school in order to be able to break into a top hedge fund post-MBA, as well as how he was able to get enough internships on his CV to overcome his non-traditional work experience. Enjoy. Okay, Props Head, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Good afternoon.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio and we'll go from there.
Sure. By way of background, I came out of what Wall Street Oasis might refer to as a target school in kind of a non-finance background, after which I went and worked in emerging markets for a number of different years. So you could say I had kind of a non-traditional path to the buy side, involving working in startups in an emerging market, doing a lot of work in frontier markets, and then returning back to the States where I attended a finance program at a business school.
Great. And then after business school, what happened there? And so, did you go straight into buy side from business school, or what happened?
In fact, I even got started on the buy side before business school even kicked off, because I had been told, and I'm going to share this with the listeners, that one of the best things you can do is do a pre-MBA internship. It's hard for a skeptical interviewer to argue with something that's on somebody's resume already showing them doing buy side work.
Very good advice. So, okay, what about, and so then since the MBA, what was after that in terms of types of funds and types of buy-side work you did?
Sure. Since the MBA, I joined a large platform fund, one of the multi-strategy firms, doing long-short equity. And I had kind of a specific niche under my coverage, which I've continued even to now. And I've since moved to another firm since then, but all with the same coverage.
Got it.
So I would say that I'm able to speak to what it's like to work at a platform fund. So you can think of something like the Citadels of the world or the Point 72s of the world, that kind of a setup. Mm-hmm. And I also did a little bit of hedge fund work during my MBA as well at different types of funds.
Before we get to the MBA, let's go to undergrad. And you didn't do a finance major. Was finance ever on the horizon? Was it something that you kind of thought was interesting, or was it late? Did it take several years after graduating?
Well, I was a bit of a busy athlete during college, so I have to say that my understanding of finance, especially since I didn't do a finance major, was kind of limited to some gibberish I saw scrolling under the screens in the dining hall when they had the TV on. And
so you're kind of coming up, let's say, to junior, senior year. You didn't have any internships, and then in the summers, kind of that stuff like that.
It's kind of funny. What I did for my junior year internship was I was deciding if I wanted to go into medicine. So I actually worked at a hospital for part of the summer, and then it's not as if I sat on my laurels not doing a finance major. I actually studied a rather in-demand language. And I spent the other half of my junior year summer working as an interpreter for a national organization for an upcoming sporting event.
Oh, very cool. So you did that. And then basically once you graduated, or as you're approaching graduation, how did you line up the job? What was the first job right at undergrad?
Well, the first job out of undergrad, I actually graduated right into the global financial crisis. So
was it a no job? Was it a no job coming out of?
I think that would probably be the best way to characterize it, yes. But I spoke an in-demand language in a country that was really just off to the races. So I thought, well, if I speak a very in-demand language and I have all this energy, why don't I see what I can do? And so, one thing I like to tell people is you should take the biggest swings when your risk tolerance is at its highest. Mm-hmm. And so when you're 22 years old, that's going to be about as high as it's going to be for the rest of your life. Right. And so I worked for a number of different startups before kind of finding my footing and eventually moving into the world of management consulting, which is not yet finance, but I got to learn a lot about business.
all those startups, what did you learn? Like, it sounds like you were using this language, and the fact that maybe you'd been educated in the US. Was that an advantage, a disadvantage as a foreigner?
Sure. What I would say is the major value was that I was able to take one language and translate it into native quality English language content. This was something that would repeat when I worked as a consultant, which actually sent me to a lot of frontier markets where native quality English for the stakeholders in the projects was kind of in short supply. And so if you're kind of like a mid-20s guy who can manage a few different processes of research and then communicate it effectively to the stakeholders, that was kind of a good niche at the time.
Got it. So why, you'd been kind of doing these startups, a couple, it looks like you were there for a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
Why not stick around on the startups? Did none of them take off, or was it just like a grind? What was your thought of why go consulting, and how did you even make that transition?
Well, you may reasonably infer from the fact that my Zoom background is not the interior of a G6 that the startup was big on equity, but we kind of ran out of time, which is another way of saying we ran out of money before kind of the rocket took off. So I would say that in terms of, not having a finance background coming out of undergrad, but having kind of a lot of world expanding experiences, what I like to say is, if a sandwich were something like, or rather if a career were something like a sandwich, I was 99th percentile hot sauce and a lot lower than 99th percentile meat and potatoes. And so the best way I could think of to kind of straighten things out and iron out, fill in a few gaps, iron out a few wrinkles, was to join a consulting firm where I'd be, kind of forced by the environment to be in front of clients and really learn very quickly what it means to be a global professional. And that's what I did.
So did somebody tell you to do that? Did a mentor tell you, hey, you should go do consulting, or was it obvious to you?
This was just actually a shotgun approach to any, things could have gone really in any number of different directions. I had wanted to stay in the region where I was. I felt like, I hadn't squeezed all the juice out of the fruit in terms of life experience that I could have gained. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things actually just hit. And then I joined the consulting firm. And
you were there for a while.
I was.
Almost 5 years.
What I would say is if somebody is worried about having too short of stints on their resume, nothing will wash away all of that, like spending 4.5 years at your next thing. It shows there wasn't something fundamentally wrong with you. It's just, there were circumstances. But it's actually in that 4.5 years, I got to see so much in consulting that that was when things started to appear on my radar that perhaps, this was a nice chapter, but I wasn't going to see this book all the way through to the end in consulting. The story wasn't going to end at being a consulting partner. And this was, I had some free time. I read some finance books, and then things really started to click. And then I started to see how what I could read or what I could see began to translate into what was going on in the world. And by virtue of working in emerging and frontier markets in consulting, I noticed this repeatable pattern where stuff I did at work would show up in articles in The Economist like 3 months after I did them. And so then I thought, oh, this is kind of the flow of information in the world. But I didn't want to stop at just offering insights or compiling data. I thought, this is really very interesting. Is there some way that I can participate in the upside of some of the investments that we're due diligencing? If there were just some way that I could become an investor. But getting back to that meat and potatoes thing, it's going to take more than just the desire to become an investor before you can make the switch. And so that was one of the big pushes for me to go do my MBA.
Now, before even going to do the MBA, when you said, it's a shotgun blast approach, and I applied to all these consulting firms and whatnot, and even other places, and that one hit, what were the interviews like? Was it the typical case interview type methodology, and were you prepared for that? Did you feel like fish out of water, given that you did startup, and then suddenly you're interviewing for all these consulting roles? And did they like that?
I think the way that went, and this would happen a couple of different times. I would probably advance to maybe, let's call it the second round or third round, but ultimately somebody else would eke over the fence. And so just in a split decision, it would usually favor the candidate who had kind of a more I would say, understandable background.
Yeah.
Because people would say, well, here's this long list of companies I've never heard of, and I can't find much information on the internet about. I mean, you're a real person sitting in front of me, but can you tell me a little bit about this? And so at some of the consulting firms, one of them had a quiz, like some kind of test to sort people. Another one was trying to kind of understand where I best fit, because it was sort of a niche, because the majority in this region, the majority of candidates would be people who had studied overseas and were returning to kind of where they felt more at home. And so the system was largely configured to receive that type of candidate. So I could be an interesting complement in such environments, but it took a little bit of sticking out of the neck of the people who wound up hiring me to believe that. As for how prepared I was, I would have loved to have had something like the guides that Wall Street Oasis has, or kind of the mentors who do kind of what I do at Wall Street Oasis, kind of help people bridge the gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was big on energy and big on ideas. And a person can never be 100% ready, but there is such a thing as being unprepared.
Had you thought about being an investor or not yet? Investing hadn't kind of gone. It sounds like the consulting is kind of what brought up the investing, working in this. Had you considered going buy side, or did you even know what like investment banking was, or any other options?
I had thought about it, and I had even thought about doing banking for a period of, maybe it was a couple of weeks. I was kind of enthralled by what I had read in all the investing books. And really, it's incredible what you can learn, the timeless lessons from reading the writings of famous investors through time, or even interviews with them. So I gained a lot from that, but it was clear to me that there was just an air pocket that had so much to make up.
You needed the meat and potatoes. The meat and potatoes.
I needed meat and potatoes stat. And so the kind of softer on-ramp was consulting. I mean, what people say about, consultants do a lot of slides, they don't do a lot of models. Yeah, that's all true. That's the way it is. But I think what it did was it created kind of the on-ramp for me to go to business school, which I don't think would have been possible had I gone straight from the startups.
So yeah, tell me about that decision, when you knew it was the right time, because you were, it looks like you're probably on a little bit on the older side to go to get your MBA.
Yes, that's right.
Tell me, why didn't you go earlier? Why stick around? It sounds like you're still learning and doing interesting, working with interesting clients, but.
Yeah, some of it had to do with how interesting the clients were. Another piece had to do, I didn't really have what a person might refer to as a mentor during a lot of these decisions. So a little bit like a Roomba figuring out the layout of a room. I just kind of learned by doing. But one piece of advice did stick with me. And I was kind of doing consulting. I was getting ready to do it, for a little bit longer. And what somebody said to me was, you should progress to a level where if everything fell apart after your MBA, you'd still shake out at a post-MBA level. So you could just slot right back in. And sure, you'd have, the last 2 years, you'd probably have some fun stories or something from business school, but you wouldn't be so at a loss. So I kind of took that to heart. And by the time I was applying to business school, I was at a post-MBA level. So I thought, okay, worst case scenario, everything crumbles, but it'll be water off a duck's back, as I won't be starting from lower on the ladder.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of people would say, well, that's the whole point of the MBA, is to kind of be able to lateral or jump or career switch. But you did kind of do that. You did leverage it.
What I would say, and people will always backfill what suits them. So, you can take this with all the salt you want. I'm still going to say it. A lot of experiences that I had that I only encountered as I progressed in the consulting job, that had I not had those experiences, I might not have gained as much as I did from the MBA. As in, situations that occurred in case studies, to me, were parallels of things I'd seen at the job. And I was able to ask more incisive questions, where if I didn't have as much experience, I'd be learning about these things for the first time from the classroom. But because my work experience was along a number of dimensions, very far removed from the standard bread and butter post-college experience, I felt like I was actually filling in a lot of gaps. And I had kind of some knowledge about working in different markets or in different environments that I think couldn't be readily taught in a business school classroom. So I think I made the most of it. Certainly, had I not gone to business school, it would have been a much steeper climb and maybe an impossible one to make the career change that I did.
Tell me a little bit about just the type of work you did as a strategy consultant. Where, you don't have to share specifics on the clients, but just like, was it the revenue optimization? Was it restructurings? What was it?
Sure. I would say some of it was stuff that people will be familiar with, kind of business unit optimization, maybe zero-based budgeting type of stuff for some clients, and just kind of rebuilding, from bare bones, what sort of resources would be needed for a business unit. Those kinds of projects, I did a few of those in a row, and those maybe had something to do with my desire to do something a little bit more interesting. But before I could even utter a peep, I got a lot of other interesting assignments. I spent over a year with a large client reorganizing their procurement department and going through kind of the processes associated there. Learned a lot about how the sausage gets made in terms of corporate procurement. And then I was actually sent to not an emerging market where I worked, but a frontier market where emerging market people may go from time to time. And so that was very eye-opening and exciting for me. And I don't think that's something that I could have seen under most other circumstances.
Okay, so when does business school come on the radar here? Year 3, year 4, and you start thinking, okay, I got to take the GMAT?
I think, what I would say is my employer at the time was putting together a program to disseminate materials internally that could be of use to other colleagues. And I, in my experience, having seen a lot of colleagues flown in from overseas, fully expecting to have reliable data and trustworthy statistics, were blinkered when none of these things turned out to be true. And so I thought, well, something that would be very useful is kind of like a field manual for working in emerging and frontier markets to help ease the transition for colleagues coming from overseas. And so I put in my proposal to kind of headquarters, and for a moment there, I was actually going to go where the corporate headquarters was, and I was going to have this kind of mini sabbatical, which, if you can architect something at the age of 27 like this, hats off to you. So the pieces were all starting to come together until the very last second when actually the entire program got shut down. And then I thought, well, I would like to do something different. I think I can't stay here anymore because when things that are so set in stone are subject to change. And by the way, it's a business at the end of the day. They're not trying to collect money from clients to fund people's sabbaticals or what have you.
Right.
But I just felt like at that time, okay, if this knowledge is not going to be directly applicable here, I'd like to do something else. And so that was maybe one of the other nudges as well.
Okay. And then so you tell me about the whole application process for consulting and MBAs, and how did you decide where to go, and then this magical internship?
Yeah, well, I was a little fortunate in that the two people who ran the office that I joined at the consulting firm were alums of the business school that I ultimately attended. Now, that didn't stop me from applying to a number of different places. Mm-hmm. But I would say the process, actually, in all candor, I did actually lob a handful of business school applications when I was at the, call it 24, 25 age. And some things looked kind of interesting, but there wasn't a clear, I should say, thrust of my application at that time. Just I knew I needed to go to business school, and that was about as far as I got. And so, I got in at one place, and then I thought, well, maybe, but I'd rather go to one of the other places that, I was talking to. And so as time went on, for this one, it's actually kind of funny. One of them, I applied in round 2, and I guess just sometimes, round 1, they already had a guy who worked in an emerging market who did another thing and did this and did that. And so that's already one of those in the bucket. So by round 2, just they already got one. They're all set. Maybe next year.
Yeah.
I did have, I always like to tell the story because enough time has passed that it's fine to share.
Sure.
One of the schools in almost all the places said that you needed to put your job experience not in chronological order, but in reverse chronological order. And this was different from all the other application processes. And just when your day job is running around a frontier market, putting out fire after fire, and there's this and there's that, you'd be surprised at like these little tiny details that can just scuttle your entire blood, sweat, and tears poured forth. So like everybody whose editing skills get 10 times better the second you hit send, when I submitted the application, I thought, oh, it asked for this in reverse chronological order, and I put it in whatever it was. I got the order mixed up, but it shook out that the way my application looked was just somebody whose career got progressively worse over the years. And I joke about it. I don't know how many people have seen the first Star Wars movie, but there's a scene where you just see a ship moving and then a laser fires and it blows up another ship. And that tells you that there is a battle going on. Well, my application at that school, I think, was that little ship that just got vaporized to show that it is a competitive process and you need to have your T's crossed, your I's dotted, and everything in a row. So it was a little bit rocky, but things actually wound up advancing at the alma mater of the people who were running the office where I worked. And just for another added layer of complication, just in case people think that they have a difficult situation, these situations abound. And actually, I could not let anybody at my employer know that I was thinking about making this move to business school. So
even the alums?
One of them had a direct revenue interest in my continued employment by the firm. And even in as much as everybody's replaceable, it would have at least taken, a good number of months to replace me, I think. And so couldn't let that particular alum know. And I could also not let the other alum actually, by the time of my application, had parted ways with the firm and was able to write a recommendation.
Oh, that's huge.
So all my recommendations came from people not currently working at the firm. And so I think it was a little out of sorts that that my application appeared to be so clandestine, but that's why they had that box.
But that happens. Yeah. I mean,
they said, is there anything you'd like for us to know? And I said, well, the reason why none of my current supervisors are writing glowing recommendations is because this is a process that I am doing independent of my job. And should things not advance, I may remain at this job. And that was that. But you only need to get into one school, and that's what I did.
And it was a great school. And so, you got in, that's exciting, but then tell me about the decision or how you actually ended up getting this buy-side internship with no buy-side experience.
Yep. Well, this is one of these things where...
buy-side meaning, we can just say hedge fund, the well-known hedge
Sure. Fund. It could be hedge fund, it could be private equity. Candidly, at the beginning, I had worked on so many private investment projects as a consultant because I was working on the heaviest of the heavy infrastructure, and that a lot of that is private, or it even takes place at the sovereign level. Right. And so I thought that was very interesting, but I also was energized by markets. But here I was thinking, which one of these am I supposed to do? I wanted to do investing. I'm going to business school. So which one is it for me? And it's like asking, what would it even be like? It would be like if you went to a mountain and someone said, so are you a skier or a snowboarder? And you're standing there with, crumpled handwritten directions for how to get to the mountain. You say, I like being outside. I like the temperature. I actually don't know which of these I'm supposed to be good at. And then people say, oh, well, you can't say you don't know which one. That'll doom your whole application. You have to have been born for this. Well, so what I did was, I dusted off my shotgun there, and I just put out leads in as many directions as I could, in any direction that I could. And
what did you use for that? LinkedIn, or what did you, at this point, was LinkedIn big? Or
well, at this time, you could do LinkedIn, but I got kind of the traction you would expect for a total stranger sending messages from very far away from here. So not a whole lot. At the end, where things shook out was I had the option. I actually had made a friend who was running kind of a mid-market PE firm in the region where I was working. Mm-hmm. And then there was something that came up through another kind of personal connection in the States, and just at the end of it, it was either, do I do something where I'm going to get a lot of investment experience in the region that I know better, or should I do something back in the States? And so, in these situations, what you do is you get on the phone, you ask your mom. And so I got on the phone, and then my mom, not having a clue about how this all works, she just said, well, you've been living outside the country for a while, and there's probably a lot of adjustment to do. So the one that allows you to make more adjustment earlier is probably the right one. And that was it. So good advice. And so that's what I did. I came back, and I had to change some habits, change a little bit about how I talked, because some of this was just region specific stuff that I didn't know that.
But so this role, this internship, I mean, it was this like a summer analyst role. So like, who do they typically give that to, and how did you even get into that funnel? Through a friend, friend of a friend or something, or?
Yeah, you can call it something like friend of a friend, kind of a referral. These are typically, that's actually a very interesting thing that you point out. Not all places will articulate that they could benefit from having a summer analyst.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, and you will only know this if you knock on 100 doors, but there could be one or two that just say, you know what, we do actually have kind of a few lingering to-dos that we just need somebody to hammer through them. And they don't even need to be superstars. They just need to do them.
Yeah.
And for my part, not wanting to be caught kind of on the wrong side of things, I did do a number of modeling courses before doing this, because I thought, I was going to be engines revved, and I just needed to, yes, I can use Excel without a mouse, just all that kind of stuff. I knew I needed to be ready.
Yeah.
And so that was what I did. And, I did a lot of research stuff, kind of the stuff that people always would like to do, but there's just not enough time to do. Finally, they had somebody who could just spend all the time in the world on it and then be gone after a handful of months.
And so, was it unpaid? This was just through a friend of a friend, but you all had also just blasted alumni. What, like just? Yeah,
this one came through friend of a friend. It was paid a nominal amount. I think that's kind of something where a calibration is required, as in when you're doing something that is kind of rare anyway, that is to say an internship before you begin your degree program. It's not necessarily something that the employer budgeted for at the end of last year, but they may handle on an ad hoc basis. So if you kind of work out what you think the ad hoc wiggle purse looks like, mm-hmm. It's going to be something, it'll keep the lights on, and the rest you can help yourself to whatever's in the fridge in the break room.
Do you mind sharing what you were paid kind of in your consulting firm, or around a range, just so we have an idea of startups? It sounded like it was a lot of equity and not a lot of cash.
That would be a fair characterization.
There were several years of that, but what do we think? What are we saying here? Like 20,000 USD a year? Like, were you living on, like, obviously a lower cost of living area, but
what I can say is you can really maximize and make a dollar go far if you know how to economize here and there. Right. And when you have fewer needs, you can just make everything go further. The consulting firm was much more, shall we say, anchored to like a global pay standard.
Right. So if you were post MBA by then, you're probably making at least six figures, right, by the end before you left.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then you have to kind of take a step down as a summer analyst, odd internship.
Sometimes you just have to. It's something I think about a lot, where just you have to kind of own the trade. You say, what is it that I want? What is required to get the thing that I want? And what am I willing to exchange for that? And so there's no, there's nothing dramatic or emotional about it. It's just a calculation of what is the price for this thing.
Right.
And so, if you're willing to make that trade, then you just own it and get on with life.
So you came back to the States, mm-hmm. had a little bit of a culture shock.
A little bit. And fantasy football got real popular while I was out of the country. I'll say that.
So then you're here. You're basically going through the summer internship at this, we'll call it a platform, a large hedge fund / they do everything. But you're there. Are you learning anything there? Is it more like you said, research projects that are just like, hey, just handle this and no one can take care of you over the next 4 months?
I think it was one of these things where in taking on kind of a summer analyst, they just wanted to put bowling alley bumpers on the amount of damage I could do by doing something wrong. And that's okay. Because, by the way, when there's no lasting interest, like suppose I did something catastrophic that took down the entire firm, what are they supposed to tell their investors? Well, it's funny, you see, we didn't think this summer analyst could get into this much trouble, but wouldn't you know it? So there's a reason why they do that. And I think actually when you get these simpler tasks, it's actually a good thing because it's an opportunity for you to excel. And at the end of it, people can say, you did X, Y, and Z. And if anybody ever comes calling asking what you did, they can say, so-and-so did X, Y, Z.
Got it. And so at this point, you're thinking, this is what I want to do. I want to actually get to the investor side of this firm.
Yeah, so it was so exciting. I'll forever be grateful for the types of interactions I saw in the investment committee at this firm.
They let you sit in on the investment committee.
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that. So this was glad for the follow-up. So I got to see how people really look at deals from every different dimension and angle. And that was tremendous because a lot of the time when you're going through models and you're saying, oh, well, should I, raise the growth rate by 30 bips here? What do I think? And then you talk to people who have made a life's work of investing in things and you see what it looks like when you pull back from everything. Now, that's not to say throw away all your growth rates, throw away everything that you think matters in the model. That's not that at all. It's just to say, this is just punching your ticket to sit in the room, but you have a long way to go before you can really be in kind of the rarefied upper level of investing.
Yeah, my fault. This was almost like more of a private equity type internship.
In this case, oh no, that's fine. So this one was private equity. And so by that time I thought, too much of this feels too much like consulting. And if one can articulate it as an itch to see what it's like in the public markets, it was clear that private equity was not going to be sufficient for that, to explore.
And you knew that just from that internship, just from sitting in there and thinking, what, public markets are still exciting for me? Is that kind of what you were thinking?
I think what I thought was, if I'm not falling over myself and loving it here, I'm not sure where I will. And so then I thought, so perhaps the answer lies in public markets. And so that's what I did. As soon as at the MBA in October, everybody.
You start recruiting right away, right? Like right away.
Right out of the gates. I mean, yeah. I'm hitting refresh on the job board, like what's going on? How do I know? And then, as is natural, a lot of people went and, they were more qualified. They had more relevant experience. And so the things that were kind of first up for grabs were the ones that they got. But you know what? I think that that's actually the way that it should be. You wouldn't want somebody who had zero experience to just, Disney Express pass to the front of the line every single time. And so I just said, you know what? I've been admitted to a school. Places will recruit from this school. And sooner or later, they're going to run out of the qualified people with all the good history. And sooner or later, we're going to land on kind of.
But that's not really, that's surprising. You think that because they're pulling from other schools too, other top schools, right? So like, did you?
It's you're right. But I think also at the other top schools, sooner or later, all the top people in the top echelon of the cohort are going to be.
Is it fair to say that there's less people also recruiting for like hedge fund or public market experience at these top schools versus like a consulting and banking?
Definitionally, just pick any year, that will be the case.
Yeah.
People will be going for consulting and banking. It's kind of a Hail Mary to go to the public markets via business school.
That's what I was saying. I want to make sure people don't think like, hey, I want to go get to the public markets. Let me go business school. Because a lot of times there's hedge funds will say, no, you need, or research places will say, no, just get a CFA or, and call it a day. Why go get your MBA?
It's a good point. And it's a point well made. Just, you have to understand that the odds are long, but if you don't do an MBA or if you don't do a CFA, the odds will be even longer. Mm-hmm. And I should also point out, it's not as if the difficulties and trials end on your first day working in the public markets. Instead, you're introduced to a whole new variety of trials and tribulations that one can have in the public markets.
As you're kind of going through this private equity summer internship pre-MBA, are you thinking to yourself, well, I really want the markets? Were you thinking to yourself, maybe I should not go to get my MBA and just do the CFA? Did that ever cross your mind?
I felt, in as much as I don't know that the bank transfer was reversible to the school.
The value was there. The value was there.
I was pod committed for at least a little bit.
Okay.
And the other thing was, I thought probably, at least in my case, chances are if I had a few cultural shocks here and there, I'd probably just be best off by going through, a quote unquote finishing school, as a lot of people do learn how to be kind of professional and interact with all kinds of people in that kind of environment. But what I thought was, here's my chance to kind of get in front of a lot of different firms for internships and just have that opportunity to chat, because it's not as if, I go down the street and everybody is playing flag football or something. And then, somebody gets sick and then I have to swap in, and then they say, oh, which hedge fund do you want to work at? It doesn't work like that. It used to more, there are all these stories, but nowadays they try to make it more formal. And so I thought my odds would be best if I were at business school.
Okay. So you're there, you're not getting interviews for the blue chip places right away because they're taking on the qualified, but then, so it looks like you did an internship during the year.
I did. So by October, I found one place. And here's what I did. And I would recommend this to anybody who's changing careers. First, you have to understand you're sending your whole application to people who are professional cynics and skeptics. And so don't try and sugarcoat things. Just be real about it, because people will see right through the sugarcoating. And so what I said was, hi, I do not come from a standard background. I am confident that you know where to find people who come from this background. I am very interested in joining, in accumulating work experience in the public markets. The way that I hope to do that is by doing an internship. I can understand if you're uneasy and have misgivings about hiring somebody with a non-traditional background. So I put to you the following as a proposition. If you don't have as many misgivings, why don't you give me some kind of piece of work that takes between 5 and 10 hours? And then if you're satisfied with the outcome of that work product, then we can talk about an internship. It's low risk to you because you're not committing to something that you don't understand. And even if things don't go anywhere, I'd be grateful for the educational opportunity to do the kinds of things that somebody working in the public markets would do. And so I was just real about it.
I love it. I love that. Everyone should replay that and just use that word for word. No, but it's great because, there's a lot of great things that you said in there in terms of like, you're being humble. You're acknowledging the elephant in the room right away. So you're not hiding from it, which makes people like you more.
I like to think so.
And give you a shot. And they get free work.
Yeah, it's really hard to, at worst, you can say, interesting note, we just don't have anything at this time. And, the worst thing you can say is nothing. And by the way, if you send out enough of those missives, you'll find that maybe 80+% of the time, they will say nothing. So you don't really get, it's not like looking where
but even
your
10% is a response rate. If you're getting a 10% response rate, even at 20%, that's incredible for a co-working like that. So,
far be it from me to say that the response rate is even that good, but it comes back to, as long as you get one, that is your next stepping stone. And now you go from person who took a break from attending all the fall babies' birthdays during business school to really getting down to the business of finding an internship to somebody who now has an internship. And once you have that, it all kind of builds, it kind of snowballs, because then you have people from the pre-MBA internship who can vouch for you, and the one that you did during the semester who can vouch for you. And then you can start to tack these on to the point where when I was interviewing for kind of the big internship in the summer, I sat in the room and the PM said, you've never done investing actually, and you don't come from a traditional finance background. Why do you want to do this? And then I said, well, I'm already doing 2 internships in hedge funds at the same time, in addition to my coursework. I'm really not sure I could do a third, and I don't know what else I can do to show that I'm interested in this opportunity, but I assure you, I'm pretty interested. And so it's just one of those things. You can debate the merits all day long about, oh, well, was that real investing, or was this, or was that? But you can't argue with, you're doing something somewhere, and there are people who will vouch for you.
And then tell me a little bit about like the type of projects they'd have you do that 5 to 10 hours of work. Was it like research specific on specific companies, industry sectors? And how many of them did you actually have to suffer through?
Oh, my word. This is one of these things where
be careful what you wish for kind of thing, or what?
I joke that, some of my decisions, my guardian angel just must be this close to death from exhaustion, keeping me out of trouble. But I find, if you do enough, if you put yourself out there and you're kind of humble about it and real about it, there's something very disarming about being very real. And so and it's hard to remember because most places just said nothing. But I did hear back from one. They said, hey, you know what? We kind of like these scrappy ragtag types. And sometimes that's what it takes to be in the markets. Tell you what, we've been looking at this company. Can you do a survey of you've done consulting, you've done this kind of thing before. Can you put together for us kind of a little write-up, 1 or 2 pages with just the market landscape of what these guys do, what the differentiation is, and if it's really even that valuable of a product. And so really all they're asking you to do, if you want to translate it into like work product, is, you take down what the average selling price is for each of the products, what the different features are. Maybe you can take a stab at why somebody would go for one versus the other one.
Yeah.
It's probably best that I don't say what I was researching.
Did you do some first party research? You actually did some research and surveys and stuff?
Yeah, I call around a little bit and try to get information that way. Sometimes people call that scuttlebutt, but this is what it is. It's feet on the street, finding out what's going on. So I did that. And then I said, well, when all is said and done, it looks like this company that you're looking at, this product is actually pretty sticky. And, as I go through product reviews on whatever product review website, people really can't be bothered to change the product once they've been hooked. So it seems like probably what's most important for this company is the customer acquisition, because once you've got it, the retention is actually quite high. Yeah. And so they said, so then they brought me in and they're trying to figure out who is this guy? This whole, kaleidoscopic resume all over the place. And so, we had kind of a chat and they said, okay, well, we're kind of a new fund and we're trying to get stuff up and off the ground, but we'd like to hand to you kind of some of the research responsibilities for this company we're looking at. And so there was like a model and going through earnings and saying okay, I think the stock is going to do this on earnings, that kind of stuff. And also taking very good notes on the interviews with experts that we talked to or with the company. And a quick aside on bringing forward some of the things that you used to do in your old job and applying them in the public markets. Most of people just aren't going to care. What fund is doing, well, I shouldn't say that. I haven't worked at a fund that has been swayed on an investment decision by a PowerPoint. Hasn't happened yet. I don't think it's coming. But what I did learn how to do is take good notes. And also just because I was working in a different region with a very different language. And I even worked, here and there as a translator. I became very highly, particularly in, business meetings in between different parties. I just became very highly attuned to tone of voice, body language, the exact words somebody chose for something. And so this was all stuff that, when they bring in the, they have sometimes these trainings with people who have worked for various law enforcement or intelligence agencies. That kind of stuff. And they'll say, well, they said it this way and not that way. And some people are, furiously taking notes. I was like, yeah, I've kind of lived this. I think I've got this. And so that was something that I could bring forward. And so they noticed that I was just able to pick up these tiny nuances. And I'll say, hey, don't you find it interesting that in the past 3 quarters, they always used this adjective to describe the market, but then all of a sudden they use this adjective, this has to be boilerplate language. They changed it for some reason, just those kinds of little things. And sometimes those can be canaries in the coal mine.
Yeah.
But I didn't kick in the door and say, what's up, everybody? I pay attention to conversations because I wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. So you're kind of doing the internship, you're doing some good work for them, and you get the big interview for a well-known fund. And the guy says, why do this? You say, I can't really prove it anymore. I mean, I'm doing 2 other internships. And they on the spot, they say you're hired, or do they force you to do a stock pitch and a short pitch, or what do they do? What do they force you to do?
At this point in time, at this particular firm, there was not so formal of an intern process as that. And if I think back on it, and I would say this to anybody who's looking to change careers, you are going to be doing a lot of work for what looks like not very much reward towards the front end. And what do I mean by that? Because people say, oh, sure, cry about it more. Well, here's the thing. During that semester, when I was looking to apply for internships, I flew to the West Coast twice in a week, and I couldn't just remain there because I had internships back on the East Coast. So, there I am just flying back and forth, going to interviews that are going, what could charitably be referred to as okay. And, you just have to keep hitting those things. So I was getting to the point where, and this is the thing I love to tell people, if you're in business school, the best thing you can do, the best skill you can invest in is reducing your cover letter cycle time. Because it takes about the same amount of time to understand a firm's investment principles, philosophies, go through the news about them. If it's a hedge fund, go through their holdings. That all takes about the same amount of time. But people just get stuck on their cover letters. And I just say, okay, your self-intro is not going to change all that much in between firms.
No.
What you're looking to do with the internship, probably not going to change all that much in between firms. So really the only thing that really changes the most is specifics that show that you've done your homework on the firm, and
if they even read it.
Yeah, not only can you spell the firm's name correctly, but you actually know a thing or two about them, and that kind of thing. And so I was getting really good at getting these letters out really fast, and so that gave me more shots on goal, because even though the majority are never going to respond, for those that do, you kind of have your foot in the door. And so the funniest thing happened when I was having the big fund interview. Mm-hmm. Someone said, somebody left such and such fund. And I said, well, actually, somebody also left to go start something. And my prospective PM at the time said, no, that was somebody else. I said, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I literally interviewed with them like 2 days ago, and they told me this is what happened. So you can make of that what you will, but I'm just telling you what I know. His phone buzzes and he looks up at me, whatever it was he saw on his phone. He says, okay, I guess you were right. But I think in that little moment right there, I was able to show that I could disagree without trying to railroad over what was said,
right,
and just lay the facts out, in kind of a judgment-free way.
Yeah.
And so what happened?
Which is a critical skill for a public market type.
You're going to have, I wasn't sure when I was going to say it, but the biggest change between the public markets and other jobs is most jobs in the world reward the ability to build consensus among various stakeholders. But public markets, you have to turn that on its head. The way to get rewarded the most in public markets is to break and bust consensus, which means you have to get very used to people doubting you, telling you you're wrong. It's not pleasant. Being told you're wrong by both the market and by market participants that you're wrong, it's not a pleasurable experience. But at least when your call is out of consensus. And that's probably one of the larger adjustments for people coming from environments where affirmation is more common than being kind of torn apart. But for what it's worth, I wouldn't take ferocious pushback personally, because the stronger the pushback, think of it this way. A PM is just going to move on to the next thing and be like, yeah, okay, I think we're done here. Like they'll just say that. But if they're really digging in, really asking tougher questions, to me, this means the wheels are turning and they're really thinking, is this worth maybe risking a little bit of money on? And that's kind of just kicking the tires on the pitch, rather than trying to dismantle you and for sport. It's not that. So I've just come to take it that way, and it's a good way of kind of keeping me on my A game. Because I say, if you can convince the people who are diametrically opposed to what you think is the right thing to do with this stock, you might be getting somewhere.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.